The glove came down over Renee Castillo's mouth before she could make a sound. She didn't fight it. Fighting it would waste air she didn't have. Instead, she looked up, past the black leather, past the wrist with its Metro Police cuff, into the eyes of the man leaning over her hospital bed, and held perfectly still. "You should have stayed quiet the first time," Officer Marcus Doyle said, and pressed down harder. Renee's heart monitor ticked past 90. She did not close her eyes. Somewhere beneath his palm, the small green light on the tablet mounted at her bedside kept glowing. Steady, patient. The only part of the room that hadn't noticed anything was wrong yet. By morning, 3 people would be under federal investigation, and 1 badge number would be printed on the front page of a newspaper Renee Castillo would never get to read out loud, because by then her voice had already been taken from her once. But 9 days before any of that, she didn't know any of it was coming. All she knew was a column of numbers on a grey hospital issue monitor that refused, no matter how many times she checked them, to add up. 9 days earlier, Renee sat at her desk on the 3rd floor of Ridgeline Medical Center with a cup of coffee gone cold beside a stack of pharmacy dispensation logs. She was 36, unremarkable in the way people who are very good at unglamorous jobs are often allowed to be unremarkable, and she had built a small, quiet reputation for finding the things other auditors let slide. The file open in front of her belonged to Walter Hines, 81 years old, recovering from surgery, alone, on a strict oxycodone taper. A note in his chart read, "Patient reports medication missing. Wellness check requested. Officer M. Doyle, badge 4471, responding." Renee pulled the pharmacy delivery log to match the timeline, the way she always did, out of habit more than suspicion. The wellness check was filed at 2:40 p.m. The pharmacy's delivery confirmation, the call that was supposed to have raised the alarm about missing medication in the first place, had gone out at 2:31 p.m., 9 minutes before anyone had an official reason to think anything was wrong. She read it a second time. Numbers didn't lie, but the people who typed them sometimes did, and 9 minutes was the kind of gap that usually meant nothing. A miskeyed timestamp, a clerical slip. She pulled 2 more files anyway. A 76-year-old woman, recovering from hip surgery, living alone, same taper, same 9-minute gap, same badge number, attached to the wellness check that came after a report nobody should have known to make yet. An 83-year-old stroke patient whose hand shook too badly to sign his own discharge papers, same pattern, same badge, 3 patients, 3 months. One officer whose name kept arriving at the scene of a theft before the theft had officially been reported. Renee sat very still for a long moment, the cursor blinking on an empty incident log. She thought about closing the file and going home. In 6 years of audits, she had never once found something that made her hands go cold while she typed. She did not close the file. She opened a new document, wrote down every timestamp in order. Pharmacy call, wellness check, badge number, patient, quantity, building a column that couldn't be argued with later because some quiet, careful part of her already understood that someone was going to try. She was reaching for a 4th file, the one that would tell her whether this pattern had an end, when her phone buzzed with a message from hospital security. "Officer Doyle is downstairs asking for the Q3 pharmacy reconciliation logs. Says it's routine." Renee looked at the badge number still glowing on her screen, then at the message, then back at the screen. In 6 years, no one outside her department had ever asked to see her work before she was finished with it. Renee just made a promise she can't take back, and somewhere outside her window, a car that shouldn't still be there hasn't moved. If you want to know who's really watching her, hit like and subscribe. Officer Marcus Doyle was already in the lobby when Renee came down with the printed logs still warm from the copier, and the moment he saw her, he smiled the way men in uniform sometimes smiled when they wanted something and expected not to be questioned about it. "Miss Castillo." He read her badge without asking. "I hear you're the one who keeps the pharmacy numbers straight." "That's the job." She kept the folder against her chest, not offering it yet. "Security said you needed the Q3 reconciliation. Routine audit on our end too. Elder theft's been up citywide. We like to compare notes." He held out a hand for the folder. "Saves everybody paperwork." It was a reasonable request. Reasonable enough that refusing it would have felt paranoid. And paranoid was not a thing Renee allowed herself to be about numbers she hadn't finished checking. She handed over 3 months of dispensation logs, the same 3 months that contained Walter Hines, the hip surgery patient, and the stroke patient whose hands shook too badly to sign anything. She did not hand over the incident log she'd built herself, the one with the 9-minute gaps written out in her own careful hand. That one was still open on her desk upstairs, saved under a file name that meant nothing to anyone but her. "Anything specific you're looking for?" she asked. "Just confirming a few discrepancies our end flagged." Doyle tucked the folder under his arm without opening it. "You'd be surprised how often the numbers don't match what the pharmacy claims they delivered." "You'd be surprised," she thought, "how often they match exactly what I already found." She smiled instead. "Let me know if you need anything cross-referenced. That's what I'm here for." He was already walking away. Renee didn't go back to her desk. She went to the second floor, to the small windowless office where Denise Okafor ran inventory control for the outpatient pharmacy, the only person in the building who might notice, from her side of the counter, what Renee had noticed from hers. Denise looked up from a shelf of amber bottles and read Renee's face before Renee said a word. "You found something. I need to ask you something, and I need you to not tell me it's nothing." That's an ominous way to start a sentence. Renee laid out the timeline on Denise's counter. Pharmacy call, wellness check, badge number, the same 3 cases, side by side. Denise's eyes moved down the page the way Renee's had, slow at first, then faster. "This delivery call." Denise tapped the middle column. "This isn't something we log publicly. It's internal. Goes to the courier service. Not to police. Not to anybody outside the pharmacy chain." "So how does an officer know a delivery is happening 9 minutes before we've told anyone medication might be missing?" Denise was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't. Not unless somebody here is telling him." The words landed between them and stayed there. Renee had suspected it since the second file, but hearing someone else say it made it real in a way the spreadsheet hadn't. "Who has access to the courier log?" Renee asked. "Dispatch. Me." And Denise stopped. "And?" "Whoever's covering weekend shifts. It rotates." Denise pulled a schedule from a drawer, ran her finger down a column of initials and went still. TM covered all 3 of these weeks. "Who's TM?" "Tom Ainsley. He's been picking up every weekend shift since spring." Denise looked up. "He's also Doyle's brother-in-law. Everybody knows it. Nobody thinks about it, because why would you?" Renee felt the floor of the conversation shift under her, the way it had upstairs when she'd first lined up the timestamps, a private, cold click of things fitting together that shouldn't fit. "I'm not going to hospital administration with this," Renee said. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because Doyle just walked out of this building with 3 months of the same logs I'm holding, and he asked for them like it was nothing." Renee folded her own copy and put it back inside her jacket, against her ribs, where it had been all morning. If administration is slow, or if somebody up there already knows and is looking the other way, the first thing that happens is my file disappears before anyone outside this hospital ever sees it. Denise's mouth tightened. "So what do you do?" "There's a federal number on the health fraud tip line. I've used it once before, for a billing case." Renee didn't say that the last time had cost her a friendship with the co-worker she'd reported. She didn't need to. Denise already understood what it meant to be the person who noticed. "If you call them," Denise said slowly, "and Doyle finds out it was you, he already has my logs. If he's smart enough to run this for 3 months without anyone catching it, he's smart enough to figure out who would catch it eventually." Renee met her eyes. "I'd rather he find out because a federal agent showed up asking questions than because I stayed quiet and let Walter Hines run out of pain medication he already paid for." Denise didn't argue with that. She copied the shift schedule instead, wordlessly, and slid it across the counter, her own quiet decision, made in real time, the kind Renee would remember longer than she expected. That night, driving home past the hospital's east lot, Renee noticed the same grey sedan parked across from her building that had been idling near the hospital entrance that afternoon. She told herself it was nothing. Parking was tight in this part of town. People parked wherever there was a space. She told herself the same thing the second time she saw it, an hour later, when she looked out her kitchen window and it hadn't moved. She did not call the tip line that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her incident log open in front of her,
added Tom Ainsley's name to the column beside Doyle's, and typed one line at the bottom of the document before he closed her laptop. If something happens to this file, the original exists in 3 places. It wasn't true yet. She made it true before she went to bed, emailing a sealed copy to an account Doyle had never heard of, and printing a second one to lock in her car. She didn't know, lying awake afterward and listening for an engine that never started, that the copy in her car would be the only version left within the week.
The tip line call took 4 minutes. Renee gave her name, her employee ID, and the 3 case numbers, and the woman on the other end read them back once, carefully, the way people read things they intend to remember. "Someone will follow up within 72 hours, she said. "Don't discuss this with hospital security in the meantime." Renee hung up feeling lighter than she had in a week, and heavier in a way she couldn't name. 2 days later, driving home from a late shift on the 2-lane stretch of Route 9 that cut through the reservoir woods, she noticed headlights sitting too close behind her, matching her speed exactly, not passing on the empty road. She sped up. They sped up. She slowed. They slowed. She was reaching for her phone when the truck's grille filled her rearview mirror. The impact spun her car sideways before she understood it had happened. The guardrail met the driver's door in a sound she would never fully remember afterward, only the sensation of it. Glass, then silence, then a taste in her mouth that was mostly copper and cold air. She did not lose consciousness. That was the detail the paramedics would keep repeating to each other, impressed and unsettled in equal measure, because when they cut the door open, Renee Castillo was awake, staring straight ahead, one hand still gripping the wheel, unable to make a sound that resembled a word. The surgeon who explained it to her 3 days later used the phrase laryngeal trauma twice before switching to plainer language. Her larynx had been crushed against the seatbelt in the impact. They had done what they could. Her voice, if it came back at all, would come back slowly and rough and much later than she wanted it to. Renee lay in the hospital bed that had, until 4 days ago, belonged to strangers whose files she'd memorized and understood with a clarity that felt almost clinical, that someone had traded her voice for the one thing she still had left, her eyes, and the small tablet a speech therapist wheeled in on her second morning, showing her how to spell out sentences one glance at a time. "I need to speak to Agent Priya Kapoor," she typed, slowly, on the second try. Federal Health Fraud Tip Line. Case reference 4471. The nurse who read it over her shoulder went very still, then very quiet, then left the room faster than nurses usually left rooms. Agent Kapoor arrived that evening, dark suit, tired eyes, the particular calm of someone used to sitting across from frightened people. She read Renee's original incident log without speaking, then read it again. "We were already looking at this file," Kapoor said finally. "Your tip moved it up the list. I need you to understand that means whoever hit you likely knew that." Renee selected her next words carefully. "Coincidence. Route 9 isn't your normal route home. You took it because a road crew closed your usual street that night." Kapoor's jaw tightened. "That's not something a stranger would know to plan around." "Doyle," Renee typed. "We can't prove that yet. What we can do is protect you until we can." Kapoor closed the folder. "You're being listed under a temporary patient code. Limited staff will know your real room number. And I'm assigning a rotating protective detail outside your door until the grand jury date is set." Renee felt something in her chest loosen, briefly, dangerously, the first relief she'd allowed herself since the guardrail. It lasted less than a day. She woke the next morning to the low murmur of a radio clipped to her shoulder just outside her door, and through the narrow window in the frame, she saw the shape of a uniform she recognized before she saw the face. The particular set of the shoulders, the way he stood with his weight rocked slightly back on his heels, patient, unhurried, like a man who had learned a long time ago that waiting cost him nothing. Marcus Doyle turned his head, caught her watching through the glass, and smiled the same smile he'd worn in the lobby 3 months and 1 wrecked car ago. Renee's hand found the tablet and typed with a speed that surprised even her. He requested this post. Kapoor, reading the message from the hallway monitor a floor away, felt the temperature of the entire case shift under her. She had assigned the rotation randomly, pulled from a list of available officers cleared for hospital security work. She had not chosen Doyle. He had chosen the door himself. That night, The hallway outside room 314 fell quiet in the particular way hospitals go quiet after midnight. Machines humming, footsteps rare. The world narrowed down to whatever light survives the dimmed corridor. Renee lay with the tablet's small green indicator glowing beside her, the only thing in the dark she trusted. Just past 2 in the morning, the camera mounted above her door began, almost imperceptibly, to turn. She didn't notice at first. She noticed the ceiling light instead, flickering once, then dying, plunging the room into a darkness broken only by the monitor's pale glow and that single patient green light beside her bed, steady, waiting. The only witness in the building that hadn't blinked. The door opened without a sound. The glove closed over Renee's mouth before she had time to be afraid of it. She had imagined this moment for 2 nights without admitting to herself she was imagining it, turning it over in the dark between sleep and the murmur of machines, telling herself Kapoor's guard rotation made it impossible. It was not impossible. It was Marcus Doyle, leaning over her bed with his badge catching the monitor's blue light. Exactly the way she had known, somewhere underneath the part of her that kept insisting she was being paranoid, that he eventually would. "You should have stayed quiet the first time," he said, close enough that she could feel his breath. Renee did not close her eyes. She had spent 3 days learning to move nothing but her gaze, and she used it now, not on him, but past his shoulder, to the small tablet mounted on its arm beside the bed, where 3 symbols sat in the corner of the screen, exactly where Kapoor's technician had shown her the night before, so quietly that even the nurse charting at the station hadn't looked up. "Hold your eyes on them in order," Kapoor had said. "Square, circle, the bar, if you ever need it." Renee held her eyes on the square. Doyle's grip tightened. "No one's going to believe a mute witness," he said, over a 14-year officer with a clean file. She moved to the circle. Something in the way her eyes shifted must have caught his attention, because he glanced toward the screen for the first time, and froze. The way people freeze when they realize a room has been listening the whole time. The green light beneath the tablet had already turned red. "What did you—" He didn't finish. The door came open behind him hard enough to hit the wall, and Agent Kapoor stepped through it with 2 federal officers, a half step behind her, no firearms drawn, just a calm and total certainty that the room now belonged to them. "Hands where I can see them, Officer Doyle." He straightened slowly, the gloves still faintly damp against his palm. And for a moment, he looked less like a man caught than a man doing arithmetic, counting exits, counting witnesses, counting whether there was still a version of the next 60 seconds that ended with him walking out of the hospital instead of being walked out of it. There wasn't. The second officer already had his wrists behind his back before he finished deciding. "This is a mistake," Doyle said, to no one in particular, in the flat voice of a man who did not believe his own sentence. 41 seconds, Kapoor said, glancing at the tablet's readout. "That's what reached our server before you touched the cable. It's enough." It was enough to arrest him. It was not, Kapoor made clear within the hour, enough to end anything. He requested this post, she told Renee the next morning, pulling a chair close enough that Renee didn't have to strain to read her lips as backup for the tablet. But requesting a post and being approved for one are 2 different signatures. Someone above him signed off on assigning a named suspect to guard the witness who named him. "Who?" Renee typed. "That's what I need to find out before I can arrest anyone else." Kapoor set a printed roster on the blanket. 4 people had authority to approve protective detail assignments for this case. I need you to help me understand which one of them had a reason to put Doyle exactly where he ended up. Renee studied the 4 names. 2 meant nothing to her. The third was a lieutenant she recognized only from a community safety pamphlet taped to the hospital's front doors. The 4th name she had seen before, not in a police file, but in a folder from her own audit, months earlier, attached to a hospital partnership she'd flagged as unremarkable at the time. "Captain Ellis Whitfield," she typed slowly. He signed the hospice partnership. Kapoor's expression didn't change, but something behind it sharpened. "What partnership?" "Comfort Home Hospice. Community Outreach. Ridgeline signed with them 8 months ago. Whitfield's name was on the press release. Why would you remember that?" Renee thought about it before answering. The way she thought about every number, that didn't quite add up, because their controlled substance intake paperwork came through our system for 2 weeks before switching to their own private vendor. I noted it and moved on. It wasn't my department. Kapoor was already standing, already reaching for her phone, already moving toward the door, with the particular urgency of someone who has just watched two unrelated facts click into a shape she didn't like. Denise Okafor gave you a supply schedule, she said, half to herself, half to Renee. I need every delivery record Comfort Home Hospice filed with this hospital since the day the partnership started. You think the medication didn't go to street resale, Renee typed. You think it went through them. I think, Kapoor said, pausing at the door, that a captain who approves protective details doesn't usually also sign off on hospice partnerships, unless he's the one making sure both sides of an operation never have to talk to strangers to move product. She left before Renee could type another question, and for a long moment the room held nothing but the quiet hum of machines and the tablet's screen, still glowing faintly where the transmission light had gone from red back to green. It was almost an hour before Kapoor returned, and when she did, she set a single printed page on the blanket, without a word. Renee looked down at the approval signature at the bottom of Doyle's protective detail assignment. The same signature, she realized with a slow, cold certainty, that sat beneath the hospice partnership in her own months-old audit file. Captain Ellis Whitfield was still in his dress uniform when federal agents intercepted him outside the Ridgeline Community Partnership breakfast, 3 days before Renee's scheduled testimony. Holding a folder he had not yet been told the contents of, he didn't ask what it was, he asked who had sent it. Kapoor didn't answer. She simply told him he'd understand soon enough. The room was smaller than Renee had expected. There was no judge, no defense table, no opposing attorney waiting to challenge her testimony, only the prosecutor, the court reporter, and the jurors who would decide whether the evidence was enough to move forward. Renee sat with the tablet propped in front of her, the small speaker beside her hand, the only voice the room would hear from her that morning. The prosecutor, a woman named Alvarez, with a calm, unhurried manner, walked her through the timeline one document at a time. Miss Castillo, tell the jury what you found in the pharmacy logs. Renee's eyes moved across the screen. The electronic voice that followed was flat and unhurried. 3 patients, same medication taper, same 9-minute gap between a private delivery call and an official wellness check that claimed to be responding to it. Alvarez entered the delivery schedule next, then the hospice partnership contract, then the protective detail authorization, Whitfield's signature sitting beneath Doyle's name, filed 9 days before Renee's crash. Never flagged for conflict of interest, because the man who should have flagged it had signed it himself. Ask the jury to look at the 2 signatures, Renee typed. Same name, same week, same office. Alvarez placed the internal memo on the projector next, dated 2 weeks before the assignment, routed directly to Whitfield's office, naming Doyle a person of interest, before he was ever given Renee's door to guard. She didn't need to say anything further. The document said it for her. Doyle testified later that afternoon, brought before the same grand jury under an agreement his attorney had negotiated in exchange for his cooperation. He told me the assignment would look routine, Doyle said. Said nobody reviews protective detail rosters that closely. It wasn't loyalty that made him say it. It was the plain, tired math of a man who understood, sitting in that room, that Whitfield had built the whole operation to survive exactly this moment. Disposable men at every level, except his own. The grand jury returned an indictment within the hour. Whitfield was arrested the following morning, in the parking lot outside police headquarters, before his shift began. There was no audience, no dramatic exit past reporters, just 2 federal agents, a set of handcuffs, and a captain who had spent 3 months believing paperwork could outrun timestamps. Renee didn't watch it happen. She heard about it from Kapoor over the phone, and then went back to what she'd been doing that morning, sitting across from Walter Hines at his kitchen table, walking him through the restitution paperwork that would restore the medication access his file had once claimed he'd stolen from himself. Months later, on a warm morning in the hospital's courtyard, Renee stood at a small podium for the opening of Ridgeline's new patient advocacy office, a room built with restitution funds, whose sole purpose was catching exactly the pattern she had once caught alone at a grey desk with a cold cup of coffee. Denise stood near the door. Kapoor had flown in for the morning. Walter Hines sat in the front row, his cane resting against his knee, listening the way he had once listened to Renee read his own case file back to him. Renee's voice, when it came, was still rough, slower than it used to be, imperfect in a way that would likely never fully heal. But it was hers, and it reached the back row without any device. They thought a woman who couldn't speak had nothing left to say, she told the small crowd. I just needed someone willing to listen to the numbers instead. Thank you for staying with Renee's story until the very end. If her courage moved you, take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find stories like hers. Subscribe if you want to keep following true-to-life justice stories like this one, and share it with someone who believes truth is always worth the wait. And in the comments, tell us, would you have spoken up as early as Renee did? This story is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real, and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration.